Good afternoon, everyone. It is January 4th, and I'm starting a new limited short term series where, over 6 to 8 episodes here on TikTok, I will discuss other conflicts around the globe outside of Israel or Ukraine. This is so that you can be somewhat informed on the more minor conflicts and wars. Each small episode will be dedicated to a specific region or country and will be released over the next few days. Obviously, this series won't cover Israel and Iran because I already talk a bit about that, and it certainly won't focus on Ukraine because that is my main content, and neither of those videos will go away. I'll continue to make those intermittently between this small series. But there are certainly other conflicts worth knowing about, and not talking about Russia and Iran doesn't mean Russia and Iran are not involved in those conflicts, as we will see throughout this small series. And this first one is no exception. So, to get things started off, I will be talking about Syria. So, the conflict between the Syrian government and rebel groups has mostly subsided, with most of the fighting largely reduced to small pockets of violence and instability in various areas, specifically in the northwest up near Aleppo. Now, just to kind of orient you, the green is the Syrian opposition forces. These are the US-backed forces, and actually within this bubble right here that I just drew is where the US forces are being stationed. There's about 200 of them. In addition, rebel forces occupy these portions as well. Now, this yellow is Kurdish forces. These are the Kurds that are separate as a part of the SDF, and they hold that area. And then anything that's in this kind of darker color in the middle here, that is the normal Syrian regime. That is the Iranian and Russian-backed Assad regime controls that. As you can see, they own about 64% of the territory versus 25% of the Kurdish forces, as well as 11% for the US-backed Syrian opposition forces. Now, this conflict has resulted in grave human rights abuses and hardships for civilians. More than 600,000 people have died since the conflict's inception in 2011, with over 111,000 people just disappearing. More than 6.9 million Syrians are internally displaced, and over 5.4 million are living as refugees in other countries. Now, the Syrian government's forces, along with Russian air support, continue to engage militant groups that are counter to Assad's regime across the entirety of the area, but specifically up in the northwest, like I said before, up in this region. Now, why is Russia supporting Assad's regime, though? Russia has a naval facility in Tartus right here, which is the only naval base in the Mediterranean for Russia, and it serves as a strategic asset for Russian military operations in the Mediterranean. The Syrian opposition wants Russia out of Tartus, which would mean Russia would not have any base in the Mediterranean, and that could be a problem for any kind of influence. Supporting Assad helps Russia maintain that influence in the Middle East and counters the influence of Western countries, particularly the United States. Russia often positions itself as a key player in regional conflicts, offering an alternative to the Western-led interventions that we see come out of the United Kingdom, France, the US, etc. On top of the conflict, Syria is facing a severe economic crisis, with the Syrian pound losing over 80% of its value since the war started, and prices for essential goods spiraling out of control. Approximately 90% of the Syrian population lives below the poverty line and often face fuel shortage and rising food prices. With Russia's help, Syria has attempted to reintegrate into the global community, and the Arab League has reinstated Syria after a 12-year suspension, but that doesn't have an impact on the sanctions. And there are competing sanctions from Russia and from the United States on the various factions within Syria who represent both sides of this conflict, and this has led to significant economic isolation. It has contributed in part to the Syrian economy starting to heavily rely on illegal drug trade, particularly in amphetamines. Now, reports suggest that the Syrian military is deeply involved in this drug trade, with allegations of substantial income from the sale and export of these substances. This has led to claims that nearly 90% of Syrians' foreign currency comes from this illegal drug trade, with revenues reportedly surpassing those of the major drug cartels in South America. In terms of regional politics, Syria's control over the production and export of these drugs could potentially be used as a leverage tool to force neighboring countries to do its bidding by using the influx of drugs or removing the influx of drugs as a bargaining chip. And just today, Jordan launched airstrikes against Syria, against suspected warehouses and hideouts of Iranian-backed drug smugglers. Jordanian and regional intelligence sources have said that the military has stepped up a campaign against Syrian drug dealers after protracted clashes last month with dozens of infiltrators from Syria linked to pro-Iranian militias and drug dealers who are carrying large hauls of amphetamines and crossing the border with also weapons and explosives. On another front, the ISIS terrorist organization's presence in Syria has actually been significantly reduced. Estimates suggest a decrease from around 31,000 fighters in 2014 to approximately 2,000 in recent years. However, the issue is approximately 10,000 of these ISIS fighters are detained in Iraq and Syria and remain somewhat unresolved as to what to do with them, posing a persistent challenge that if they are released, they once again become problematic for neighboring countries. Now, ISIS is against Iran, so therefore Iran will have influence in that region. And if you remember, it was ISIS that recently claimed responsibility for that explosion in Iran. So basically, as 2024 starts up, we can expect fighting in Syria to increase this year as neighboring countries continue to take kinetic action against Iranian, Assad-backed Syrian drug cartels, as well as weapons and explosive smugglers